Okay, folks, so once again, we are pretty much done. Okay, Taylor, go ahead and kick us off. You can unmute yourself or you can go ahead and just type it in.
Okay, so my stepdad actually has a inversion table for his back and its prescriptions and stuff. And I was like just wondering because I know that you said whenever we're laying down horizontally, the discs actually stretch out a little bit more, and that's why you're like taller in the morning. So I was just wondering, like, because you kind of like lay upside down on one of those tables. So like, would that be doing the same thing, or would it just be kind of flipping you over and putting the pressure more towards the opposite direction? Does that make sense?
So the idea there is, are we talking about compressive force or tractional force? So the key is right now, me standing here, I'm undergoing compression. So the weight of my skull is pushing down on my first, on the atlas, which is pushing down on the axis, and then all the way down through the cervical spine. And then that has the weight of the neck and everything above it. Once we get to the thoracic spine, now we have the weight of the entire head, neck, plus the weight of the limbs as we go through, or the arms. And so that's all compression. Now, if I push down on the table in front of me, that is now giving me decompression. That's giving me tension because I'm pushing with my upper body musculature, my body effectively upwards. So what I now have is I'm picking up the weight of my hips, thighs, legs, and feet, pulling my torso downwards. So same thing if I'm hanging from a bar. I'm still having that decompression throughout the thoracic spine and especially the lumbar spine. Now, when you do an inversion table, you also have that decompression of the weight of your skull lifting your neck upwards, which is again giving you that decompression throughout the entire system. So the key is just think about biomechanics, think about forces. Are we compressing, so pushing things together? So if you're in a headstand, you have compression going through your cervical spine, through your thoracic spine, through your lumbar spine. If you're doing a handstand, you have compression going through your thoracic spine and your lumbar spine, but you don't have that compression through your neck. You have tension because it turns out your head is pulling your body downwards from that neck position. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so when we talk about the cardiorespiratory system, sorry, Bree's question was about the homework assignment and components of the system that we would want for a swimmer. Well, remember, our cardiovascular system is made up of the three major components: the heart itself, the vasculature, so the pipes that it's pumped through, arteries, arterioles, capillaries, veins, venules, and then it's made up of the fluid, which is blood. So we would want to approach all three of these components. So yes, that brings up the heart, and when we talk about the heart, we've got heart rate and we've got stroke volume. And those are going to be predicated by the size of the heart, the amount of myocardial tissue, so the actual muscle in the heart, and a couple other components. Blood, we've talked about those fractions and how we want it to be optimized, and essentially the circulatory system and how that would want to be optimized. Now, when it comes to the respiratory system, obviously that's the breathing in and out. In a perfect world, if we wanted to have a really good swimmer, we want them to have gills as opposed to lungs. But at the same time, we obviously are not dealing with, we have that limitation. So instead, probably just a larger lung volume so that we can be able to breathe a little bit easier, so to speak. Okay. Yeah, and you could bring up the capillarization efficiency of the lungs, but that rarely tends to be a limiting factor for most athletes. So does that kind of answer your question there, Bree? Thank you. All right, anytime, Bree, anytime. Okay, so, oh, look at that, 2 down. Well, Will and Gracie, both you guys are unmuted on my end, so what questions do you guys have?
Well, I'm glad you told me that I was unmuted. I did not know that.
Hey, it's not like you're listening to anything nefarious in the background or having your parents yell at you, so you're all but what question do you have to review on for the material that we've talked about in the class so far?
I don't really have anything specific to ask.
Okay. Gracie, nothing you want to go ahead and go through, highlight, talk about?
Not off the top of my mind.
Okay. Abby, anything you want me to go ahead and talk about?
I just had a question about the extra credit. I was doing, I think it was like the part where it asks for the peak power and all of that stuff. I think you briefly, I came in at the very last time, and I didn't get to hear it, but how exactly, is there like a specific equation that we should be following to get that? Or I don't know. I guess I'm just confused.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, when you're talking about the peak power, you're trying to look at what would be a good indicator of peak power. And so, power is obviously the combination, well, it's the work that we do over a period of time. So it can either be a really heavy load that's moved, over a longer period of time, or a really light load that's moved in a very short period of time. So you just need to find a good example of that and then break that down from whatever endeavor or whatever individual you're looking at. So what individual are you trying to solve for right now, Abby?
I did mine on Captain America.
Okay, cool. So what you could look at for power, static strength, you could literally look at the curling the helicopter scene. That's, I would think, probably the easiest thing. But then as far as power, you could try to figure out how fast he throws the shield. So effectively, you figure out the velocity the shield had, which means he had accelerated in this relatively short period of time over the short distance. And so if you have the weight of the shield and then the time of which it took him to accelerate it and the distance that he accelerated in, so that's the work force times the distance, and then you have it over time, now you have the power output throwing the shield. Otherwise, I think the scene where he's punching the heavy bag at the end of the very first Captain America film, that would be, another okay indicator. Or, some of the other ludicrous fight scenes where, he either picks up and throws somebody, or, heck, there's the one scene where he literally throws a motorcycle at people in the Avengers. So all of those are going to be able to give you some ideas of power output.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Good. And then once you do that, divide it by body mass, and then you have the power to weight ratio. All right. So, Brent, what questions do you got for me, bud?
Yeah, I was going to ask about the extra credit, but I think Abby kind of cleared up all of my confusion there too. So,
Yeah, guys, it's meant to be fun. I don't expect you to have a perfectly correct answer, but I am, expecting that you're referencing how you came up with these things, and obviously showing your work, showing your math. That's why I kind of gave you the walkthrough that I'm currently doing for fun on my own, with trying to figure out what some of those values would be. And obviously, you're making wild estimations that are really, really hard to narrow down, but you're having to think about things like aerobic capacity, anaerobic capacity, and then the different physiological components that are going to be related to it. Yeah, the only thing I'd say just be mindful of is the fact that, when we're talking about different markers, that's why the Marvel universe is useful, because it's supposedly based upon, Earth. So in theory, gravity is the same, the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere is the same. All of those components are the same. It's just obviously the physiology of the individuals will be way different. So, good. Fair enough. Emily, any questions, since Gracie didn't have any and Bree's already put one up there, but Bree, if you want to put another up in the chat, feel free.
Just about tapering, is that only beneficial for like long distance athletes?
No, tapering is great in strength power athletes, specifically when you're talking about individuals doing things like Olympic weightlifting competitions, powerlifting competitions, and then also things like high-level sprinters. The only issue with the taper is the fact that a taper is meant to be taking about 1 to 2 weeks to really dial things back so your body can completely recover from all of the fatigue that you've induced through all of your hard training. So that way, when you go to compete, you're fully recovered, you're ready to go, and you're going to be able to, honestly dominate, because you don't have any of your performance being masked by, once again, fatigue, meaning sarcomere damage, glycogen depletion, damage to your connective tissue, all those little extra, dings that occur thanks to hard training, but also productive training. So if you can really ramp up and hit that peak for your sport, it's great. The problem with it is sports where you can't really ramp up and hit a peak. For, back when the world was still working, aka, a couple weeks ago, when you're talking about the, NCAA March Madness basketball, obviously there's a lot of teams that were really good and you knew were going to be going to, March Madness, so to speak. Schools like, insert name, you guys know, and I just, whatever, I don't really care that much. But what's going to happen, though, is for other teams that barely make it, where they have to win their conference tournament, or they have to obviously have a really good season, they can't afford to just hit that peak once at the very end of the season. Because if they really hit that peak for their conference tournament, well, the idea is once you hit your peak, you come right back down. Now, not like you come down massively, you drop 100%, well, that would be death, but you drop more. A good taper should hopefully net you like an increase of maybe as much as 5% increase in performance. There's some that are even higher than that. Usually it's more like 2%, but it still adds up. So if you can just know you have to be really good on that one day or that one weekend, you can definitely taper for it and hit it appropriately. But if you've got to be good consistently, so obviously the teams that made it into the tournament, what's the point of waiting to hit your taper until the final game of the basketball tournament if you get eliminated in the first game? So you have to try to hold a high performance for the entire time, where in a perfect taper you could be a little bit better, but it's better to hold that for as long as you can than it is to try to hit that peak and then come down and maybe flux down a little bit, and if it's single elimination, you lose and you're out. Does that make sense of how, or the basic how you'd apply a taper and why you'd want to use it?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anytime. Jake, what questions, comments, concerns you want me to go ahead and go through?
Well, I'm assuming that there's probably only one Jake in class today, so.
Oh, yeah, my apologies. Yeah, just you.
Oh, yeah.
Latin.
Yeah, you're good. Not anything pertaining like directly to the material, but as far as like right now, RTC has like all the cadets doing their PT plan that is set out, right? And I was just wondering, like, is it counterproductive when they put us on like a 4-mile run on a Wednesday and go for an 8-mile ruck on a Thursday? Like, is there any room for improvement, or are you just kind of like, can you be a runner and a rucker at the same time,
That's a great question, bud. At the end of the day, okay, now we're talking about, how we're applying stress and what we're really trying to do to induce changes. So that's a great question, because if you think about it, when we train, we decrease our performance acutely. We're then going to go ahead and have a little bit of time where we're holding our position. Actually, I think I can stop the screen share because it's probably not that useful. So I can use bigger hand signs. So we take our initial performance and then we're going to go down a little bit. And then the idea is that's when we're going to start to have all that super compensation. Eventually we're going to bring ourselves back up, and then we're going to have that super compensation. Now, what you can be doing with that 4-mile run, and here's the real big problem with dealing with large groups of people. If all of us on the call were to go ahead and do long distance training, which would be hilarious, because I've been pretty straightforward with my thoughts on typical long distance running and obviously how good I am at it. Now, fatigue for most of us that we're going to have induced is probably going to be resolved in somewhere from 24 to 72 hours. Now, there might be some of you guys that are just obviously aerobically trained where you're going to be back in less than 24 hours. And you're going to be back to baseline, maybe even a little bit super compensated because you're just ready to roll. Now, there's going to be other of us, especially that don't do that much distance running, especially that amount of distance, and we're going to be not just down. We're going to barely come back up by the time we're doing our next stressor, which is going to drive us down further. Now, if we're programming effectively in a way that allows us to now resolve the fatigue induced from both sessions, so we super compensate from those, then we're going to make progress, which is the goal. Now, therein lies the big issue with writing programs for massive swaths of people, which is you can have a program where you're right. You induce not enough stress because it's too easy. They come back to baseline because it didn't really matter. And then you have the next training session, it wasn't that hard, and they come right back to baseline. You've congratulations, you've done two things that made you tired acutely, but really made no difference on your progress. Or you can have it drove you down further, and then you barely came up again before it's time to train again, and then you possibly get hurt. But what we're obviously looking for is something that's going to drive us down, and either we can bring ourselves back up just shy of where we were before, or even super compensate a little bit, drive ourselves down again, and then really get that super compensation on the back end. So you can program like that. It requires like a kind of, hopefully now me kind of talking it through, realize it's pretty complex. That's why like a lot of lifting programs are usually, you don't squat heavy every single day. Instead, you squat heavy that one day, so you're sore for that 1 to 2 days afterwards, and then maybe you try to train in 48 hours, maybe it's 72 hours, but that's based upon when you come out of that trough and you start to improve. Now, the training that I do to myself, because I'm older and honestly I need more stimulus in order to make progress where I'm at, I have to drive myself down. So by the end of a training cycle, I'm dinged up, I'm beat up, I'm tired, I don't want to lift weights. So that way, whenever I give myself that deload week, then I'm going to have that super compensation and I'm going to be making more progress again. Now, that's when you get further on with programming. Initially, all you have to do is apply enough stress that they go down and allow them to come back up, and then just keep riding the wave upwards with that performance. But once you get to higher level athletes that don't make as much progress, because they just effectively are closer to that genetic ceiling or otherwise, that's when you got to start being a little bit more deliberate with how you're applying that stress. But the genetic ceiling is also, it exists, but at the same time, the way that we look at it and the way that we prescribe it, so to speak, isn't that accurate. Because like anything else, it's the genetic ceiling given all of the other caveats in life. So, you know, we obviously have talked about ergogenic aids. There's some things you can use that can definitely enhance your performance. But the other side of it being is the different things you're willing to do to really get yourself to the highest level of athletic performance. And anybody, you know, here listening to the lecture today, and including myself, there are a number of things that we could do to be better at whatever athletic endeavor, academic endeavor, or otherwise that we wanted to be better at. But we are not willing to pay that price, if that makes any sense. So.
Yeah. Good answer. Yeah.
Okay. So, you know, just, it's one thing to keep in mind. I wouldn't say that they're doing a bad job of the programming. You know, they're doing their best. They know more about military science than obviously I do any day of the week. And it turns out I have a PhD in this stuff. So it kind of helps when I'm talking about programming. I've got a little bit more of a firm academic basis of kind of how to set things up conceptually, and then obviously how to apply it. Whereas, you know, a lot of those guys, they're doing their best. They're doing their best. And, you know, sometimes it leaves a little bit to be desired, and that's okay. So, all right, Taylor, unless you got another question, you are good to go. Tori, anything I can go ahead and break down and talk about for you?
I was just wondering, on like when we're taking the exam, I know we have quite a few hours to do it. Are we able to like leave the exam and then come back to it?
I believe you can. Like,
It's just my Wi-Fi is really bad, so I was wondering if it like cuts out, if it's just gonna like submit it for me.
Yeah, no, you should be good. And I think I've got it set up that you kind of get it all at once, so it's not just like one question at a time, it's just everything's there.
Okay.
So, you know, do yourself a favor, make sure, yeah, if it gives you issues that you're just trying to get it done, however you can approach it. That's, yeah. And if you guys really have some issues, like your internet just completely just dies on you or otherwise, that's why it is so long that hopefully you can panic and, I don't know, sit in a parking lot in front of a Starbucks or something like that. But obviously the shelter in place thing is pretty rough. Can you steal any of your neighbor's Wi-Fi? And by steal, I mean borrow. And by borrow, I mean, I literally ask him like, hey, can I get your Wi-Fi password in case mine eats it? I can use yours.
Yeah, I could probably try that. Or I could use like my hotspot if I have to.
Okay, so just make sure you guys have a backup. Like I'm using my home's internet, which is it's really bad with upload speeds. Download speeds are okay, and it's really not great. But the download speeds are only good if you're hardlined in. So I actually have like the network cord running from our router all the way over here, so that way, I can talk to you guys. But whenever I go to upload this after we get done talking up to like YouTube so everybody else can see it, I read a book because I cannot download anything. I can't check my email. I am literally effectively dark aged for a little bit with my internet because it's just that slow. So the 5G that my wife and I's phones get is literally faster than the internet we pay for in our house. But we don't have an unlimited data plan, so that's why we use it. So, okay. Anyone else have any general questions that you guys would like me to go ahead and field? I know Will, Grace, you've had a little bit of time to think now. Anything you'd like me to go ahead and touch upon?
I can't really, like nothing really specific, but something like for personal training, like, I'm like, you know how we talk about, like
Yes,
aerobic style training.
talk about those.
Okay, we talk about, for example, aerobic style training where you're going for a while without stopping, or like lifting where you're like doing a heavy load and then you take a while to like recover and then you go again. But I was wondering, like, is it good to, can you combine those like different style training in one day, or is it better to like maybe do more anaerobic and ATP, PCR like one day and then aerobic style training a whole nother day? Like, what is the best way to like do various types of training?
Okay, great question, because that is really freaking involved. So the first question I have is, you guys take a programming class, right? They go into this?
I haven't taken it yet.
Okay. For those of you guys that have taken, was it adult physical fitness programs, you guys approach this, right?
I'm in it now, and we're kind of given just like templates and kind of pushed off to like kind of do it ourselves with interaction. So we didn't really go deep into it. Does that make sense?
You guys want to touch on strength conditioning?
No. Like that class is more about pretending that you're a personal trainer and basically like interacting with your clients.
Okay. Cool.
So not saying it's bad, but like I just don't think we go straight into, okay, this is how you can develop one from scratch.
Okay. Emily, I appreciate your comments. We are recording, so we're not going to put more opinions out there. I'm just going to talk now and approach Gracie's question. So thank you so much. At the end of the day, when you guys are developing any program, the key is like anything else is we all have a finite amount of recovery capacity. So the more energy that if we're trying to put energy into everything at the same time, we're not really making much progress in any one given area at a time. So we want to try to be as deliberate as we can with really trying to develop one of those systems over the other. So the first easy question is, can you train more than one element on the same day? Absolutely. And if you're working with an athlete that's already in that really good condition, like we're talking about that basketball player that's trying to maintain their performance, then yeah, we're going to see in their training program, specifically in season, there's going to be a little bit of strength maintenance, power maintenance, hypertrophy maintenance, and then whatever conditioning maintenance we need to do just so they can still play their sport, but usually the conditioning is kind of in playing their sport and or practice for the sport. Now, when you're trying to develop an athlete, specifically we're going off season, we've got plenty of time. So our first thing we want to do is prioritize effectively the systems of the body that take the longest to develop. Now, when it comes to metabolic changes, your aerobic performance takes the longest to develop, both aerobic glycolytic and beta oxidation. So arguably the further away we are from actual competition, the more time we want to spend developing the aerobic abilities. And we develop the aerobic abilities through doing enough volume of work at a high enough heart rate that's going to cause positive changes on the heart, positive changes on the circulatory system, and positive changes on the blood, while being specific, or as specific as we can be, to the muscles involved in the sport. So if my goal is to develop the aerobic battery of a lineman, I'm going to have him doing high resistance bike work, which, Gracie, do you remember me telling you about that back when you were in Sling City?
Yes, I remember.
So the idea is you're going at like the highest resistance you can set on the bike at a super low cadence. We're talking 20 to 30 RPMs. So that way, every time you pedal, you do have to tap in those type 2 fibers. But since it's concentric only, it's not beating you up. So we don't have the eccentric damage that we have to recover from. And then secondarily, what we're going to be able to do is obviously increase capillarization to those fibers, increase mitochondrial number in those fibers, and increase all of the enzymes related to aerobic metabolism and glycogen stores. So by doing the high resistance, could be biking. I also like sled push and sled pull. So not the prowler sprints that you guys have done as part of softball training or seen like on the internet of people like pushing the sled and puking. Instead, it's going to be nice, long and slow, consistent, just push the sled, develop the aerobic capacity of those muscles, taking frequent breaks, but we're not going max speed, max velocity. Instead, we're focusing on, once again, activation of the specific fibers in those muscles we're looking for and development of that aerobic structure. Now, this is going from more the metabolic side. If we're going to get, I'm not going to get into the resistance training because that's obviously a lot more complexity. So now once we get closer to season, that's where we want to get much closer to our actual needs of the sport. Now, if it's still aerobic performance because you're a cross-country runner, then, well, I guess you guys can probably guess what you're still going to be doing. A lot of aerobic work. But if you are going to be doing something like the aforementioned American football, where it's short burst, recover, short burst, recover, that's when you're going to start to focus also on the ATP PCR system with aerobic recovery. Or if we're going to talk about something like basketball that's very anaerobically glycolytic, that's when we're going to start doing those longer duration sprints at a lactic level. So now we're going to be going out, if we're on the track, this could be doing something absolutely miserable, like running 400 meters. This could be obviously something like doing shuttle runs or suicides on the basketball court, or obviously just playing the sport in general, like an up-tempo full court press, something along those lines. So we're really going to be metabolically challenging them. Now, your anaerobic system, which remember sits above that aerobic system, isn't going to take as long to develop. It's usually going to take about 2 to at most 4 weeks to really get that up at a high level. The aerobic stuff, you can obviously spend years trying to develop it. So with our programming there, we're looking for obviously durations in that effectively 30 seconds to 2-minute range. We're looking at, depending on the sport, a longer or shorter recovery. So meaning we could have a full recovery if you take 5 minutes between bouts, or we could have a short recovery where we're having you do effectively just like a 30-second rest or something along those lines. That's going to mimic more like the sport of boxing, like the sport of MMA, of wrestling, where you're not going to get a full recovery. You're still going to have to deal with all that anaerobic byproducts that you're getting from that movement. And so then, Norbs, we live in the suburbs, bud. The most dangerous thing around here is you and me. So from there, we're going to go ahead and see that development has been about as high as we're going to be, and then we're going to hold that for the rest of the season. Now, we're still applying those basic principles of training. Notice we talked about specificity of the energy systems. We will obviously have to taper it to the individual. We can go ahead and have some form of progressive overload. Sorry, Norbert, there's somebody at the door, folks. I guess I need to attend to this. I will be right back. All right, and we're back. So I guess we now have a box outside the house, and Norbert needed to make sure that everybody knew that. So sorry, guys, if I kind of lost you But getting back to Gracie's question, when we're trying to develop that metabolic capacity of an athlete, once again, we're trying to progress it so that we are going to have our athlete, they are in shape to either train for their sport or play their sport. So now let's start over again. How good of aerobic capacity do we need to have for that athlete? I would argue most athletes, we just need to have enough of an aerobic base that they can recover in between each rep of whatever their sport is to go ahead and do another one that's a pretty good high quality. So if you're talking about something like fielding practice for obviously baseball or softball, yeah, you got to be able to recover in, could be as little as 30 seconds before you got to go sprint down another ball, especially if you're an outfielder. So we got to have a decent aerobic capacity. We have to have that anaerobic ability specifically for more of those sports like basketball, potentially a little bit with soccer if we're doing small-sided games. So that way we're going to be able to perform on a high level. But if we're doing something like track and field, we're a shot putter, we're a thrower, we just got to be able to go up there, rock the implement, and then we get to recover for a couple minutes. So once we know how much aerobic capacity do we need, then it's a matter of trying to get to that level. And like anything else, just getting extra credit in the area doesn't really help you more in your sport. It's getting better at your sport. So once we get to the level we need, okay, now let's look at that anaerobic system. Do we need to bring that up? And then, okay, once we've got those two systems there, do we need to do anything with ATP PCR? What else do we need to go ahead and tap into? So with your programming, with your athlete, you do want to have those elements showing up multiple times per week, specifically what you want to develop. Now, if you're trying to develop that aerobic performance, we're talking 2 to as many as 4, even 5 legitimate sessions per week training. So back to Jake's earlier comment or question, when you talk about the difference between rucking and jogging, I would, actually, Jake, if you don't mind, I'd like you to unmute yourself for this one because you're the guy that lives it. I'm the guy that likes to, quarterback stuff from the couch. Hands down, I think the soreness from rucking isn't really that bad compared to the soreness from running.
It just depends on your technique, honestly. Like if you're untrained in the way of rucking, like you're running up the uphills and you're walking down the downhills and you sprint and you stop really fast, you're gonna get shin splits from hell. But if you're doing it right, it's not that sore. It's not that bad.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So that's where, getting back to when you saying putting the same stimulus or the stimulus is pretty close to one another. If it's that biking to nowhere, I'm not worried about you riding hard on a bike, especially at your guys' age, nearly every single day. Like you can ride on a bike and the most dangerous thing is if you wreck. If you wreck the bike, yeah, now we got to take a couple days off because you might be really jacked up depending on how fast you're going and if you hit something that didn't have any give. But if you guys are going to try to go out and go run every day, all the impacts, the shin splints and otherwise that Jake so eloquently say can occur from all of that, like, yeah, we're going to have to dial it down. You guys could push or pull a sled also nearly every single day of the week, and you're going to be okay. You're not going to be that sore. You're not going to be that beat up from it because it's mostly concentric on the exercise. So when you're looking at your athlete, that's where it can be daunting because we have to think of it holistically, which is, are we applying enough stress specifically in the ways that are going to help them improve with the greatest amount of transference to their sport? Now, when I say transference, it's literally how much I improve at this activity is going to improve my actual sport performance. And we talked about that with kind of that sigmoidal relationship that we're going to find for a lot of physical abilities being mobility, strength, power, endurance, etc. Where, once we hit that top end part, we're not getting a whole lot of development. And if we really suck, it doesn't matter, but it's that midpoint where we have the greatest return on our investment. And so when you're having your athlete and you're programming out all of this metabolic work, okay, like where are they at in this curve? Are we already up here? So like, why are we even bother doing any aerobic based stuff in the off season? They're already in great aerobic condition. Let's focus on putting a little bit of emphasis, putting 1 session, maybe 2 sessions per week of aerobic performance because we just want to maintain, but we're putting all of our emphasis into putting on muscle mass because maybe they've got a great aerobic motor. It'd be like if a cross-country kid came and played softball. I don't think the aerobic motor is going to be the issue. I think it's going to be the power output. I think it's going to be the hand-eye coordination. I think it's going to be those skills. That's where you need to put the energy into the training because we all have the same 24 hours in the day and we all have the same 7 days in the week. So if we can make sure we utilize those hours as effectively as possible, we're going to get a better return on investment, better performance. Now, at the same side, is if you guys got one of the throwers from the cross country team, or sorry, from the track and field team, to come over and play softball for you guys, yeah, their power outputs can be pretty damn good. Now, they still need to be able to hit a damn fastball, a rise ball, much less anything else, and they got to be able to learn how to field. So we might be spending more time for them on still skill development, maybe mobility, because they might not be used to getting down low to catch the ball, and then spending some time building that aerobic base because they don't really have much in one. So that way they're going to be more useful for you and be able to do more repetitions and get more quality work done within a given period of time. So a lot of stuff coming at you, Gracie. At the end of the day, we just start off simply. Most of those programs, when it comes to aerobic training, you want to think of it as in total time or total yardage. So meaning total time, it's like the first day we're going to do a tempo run style. So it's going to be run across the field, walk a little bit, do some push-ups, get up, walk a little bit, run across the field, walk a little bit, do some push-ups, and keep going back and forth like that. And whatever other type of, or you can just do long, slow distance, hence the riding the bike, the running to nowhere, the riding on elliptical like behind me. You just want to make sure that they're doing enough work that once again, we're going to be building that performance. And so we're slowly going to increase the distance they're covering or the time at which they're maintaining that work output for. And then once we get to those levels that we're really using as our indicator, it could be like a beep test that we're using for testing to figure out like, okay, they're aerobically in shape enough for the sport. Then we want to start on the sprinting work and more of the anaerobic stuff. And same thing, we're looking at distance, we're looking at total time. So we could start off with just 2 or 3 sprints and then work our way up to maybe as many as 10. Or we could be slowly increasing the yardage of those sprints. So we start off with, we're going to do 5 200-yard sprints. And then we're going to go and do 5 225s, 5 250s, trying to increase our volume by only about 10 to at most maybe 20% per week. Anything over that, and you're really starting to risk, adding too much, and those negative outcomes can occur. But we want to start off simply and then increase this with time. That's going to allow for the increase in those systems we're looking for.
Yes, that makes sense.
It's not easy. Programming for sports and programming for athletes is a very difficult thing to do well. And it's something that you can also do, obviously, really poorly. And I've never probably used the quote in front of you guys, but it's I find it's a very telling one when it comes to training in general, which is the worst program in the world done with the greatest amount of intensity will beat the best program in the world done with no intensity. So you still have to obviously approach training with a certain amount of not necessarily enthusiasm, but effort. And that's going to give you more of the progress that you're looking to get from your athlete. And so you can be slightly misguided in how you're applying things as long as it's not just straight up illogical insanity. Like every day you're going to get up and I want you to headbutt the cinder block wall until you get knocked out. And then each day you try to headbutt it a little bit harder before you get knocked out. Like, no, that's stupid. Those are brain injuries. We want to avoid those obviously as much as we can because they are awful. But if instead it's like, you know what, we're going to go out there and we're going to, lift heavy with good technique. We're going to run hard. And I don't care if it's long distance running, but if we're pushing people and they're pushing their physiology, they're probably going to make some progress. And in the short term, especially when you're dealing with young people, it is hard to hurt a young person with a program unless you do not know what you're doing. Like, because you can get away with so much stupidity when you're young. Gosh, how many of you guys, up until obviously recently, you had that friend that was just like, how do you function? Like, you're literally getting obliterated drunk nearly every day of the week, and you still are doing well in your classes. Like, yeah, it's not unheard of that the body can go through and deal with a lot whenever you're spry and young, and then, your joints don't click and clack every time you move, so you feel like a Rice Krispie treat. But that's me, and I'm complaining, so that doesn't matter. Who cares? So, Abby, Rank, are you able to unmute yourself? Or are you not good enough a connection to talk? Oh, cool.
Yeah, I can talk now.
Awesome. Okay, what questions do you maybe have that I can go and field?
I had a couple that were like about the final, but they were really covered Monday.
Okay.
And I'm sorry I joined this chat late, so I don't really know what's already been discussed, but
No, it's okay. I don't mind reiterating. The key is, guys, we've covered all of the materials in the class, and I'd rather be open to you guys, since obviously we're kind of missing the in the classroom conversations. Otherwise, I'm going to guide them when no one has anything to say to me, because I don't like talking to myself. It just seems weird. So is there anything that, you'd like me to kind of just talk about again, or a topic in XPhys that you didn't fully maybe make sense to you initially? Something we can go ahead and touch on?
sometimes I have a little bit of an issue with getting the like pH stuff kind of like backwards.
Okay.
If that makes sense, like getting alkaline and acidic like mixed up. So like what are like key points that you have that would make that a bit easier to?
Okay. So when you think burn, think from hard work, think, acid burning through something. So if you've ever seen the Alien movies, which is a great story because it really all boils down to no one listening to a smart woman. If you ever get a chance, that's really the basic story of the plot of the first 3 films. But effectively, it's that acid that burns through things. So whenever you're doing the hard anaerobic work, you're dropping your pH down. So it's starting to burn through, or it's starting to feel that burn in your muscles, which is causing those proteins in your muscles to actually literally unfold a little bit so they don't work like they're supposed to. So you can literally drop your pH low enough that your muscles just fail. And I'm sure everybody here has done that super high rep of some exercise or otherwise where it's like the intent nervous system wise to perform was there, but they couldn't do it. Like you couldn't keep up the same speed if you're sprinting. You couldn't lift the weight again if it obviously was some type of body weight calisthenic or resistance training endeavor. That's because of the pH going too low. Now, if we increase our pH higher, and that's through using sodium bicarbonate supplementation, could be through actually kind of over breathing, so to speak, so hyperventilation, we're going to be able to actually buffer a little bit better. So we're actually going to be able to keep up that performance in the anaerobic systems a little bit longer than you think. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes a lot more sense.
Awesome. Good. So obviously we've gone through everybody once. If you guys have got any other questions you'd like me to go ahead and touch on, go ahead and unmute yourself. Otherwise, I'm going to go back to the screen share, and we're going to go ahead and specifically talk on a little bit more, or a couple of things that I haven't touched on for a little bit, but I definitely want to go ahead and approach. So anybody else have anything else you guys would like me to go ahead and touch on? That's a no? Okay. So what we got here, guys, and this is, you can find this up on the Blackboard site. And then also if you look through the old YouTube stuff, you'll see the 2-part full review I did for one of the semesters of XPhys with some of the students. And it was a great time. I had a lot of fun. So we've got, the different chapters here of, we start off with muscle phys, go to energy systems. But then, the neurological system obviously is something I really enjoy talking on. But specifically, what I want to touch on a little bit today is number 5, which is energy expenditure. When we're talking about energy systems, when we're talking about playing any sport, it's just back to biomechanics. All we're looking for is either work or power output. And so we need to produce that energy to allow us to do that work, to have that power output. If we're not able to produce that energy, we can't do that work output, both acutely and then chronically when we're talking over time. So this is weird. I am popular today. This never happens. Be right back. Okay. So when we're talking about this energy production and being able to keep it up for a longer period of time, we're obviously getting into all of those different energy systems, and we're going to be utilizing all of them. The key is, at the same time, which are we emphasizing the most? So now, just to keep us alive and going, we have that resting metabolic rate. And so that is going to be the caloric demands you have literally from just sitting there watching. I'm sure some of you guys are probably laying down on a couch, bed, etc. Maybe some of you guys are like me and you like to stand, so you're doing that too. That's fine. But after there, we have the energy expenditure that we get from digesting our food. And this is known as the thermic effect of food. And that's going to be getting us more calories that we're burning each day, nowhere near as much as the resting metabolic rate. And then we have the final component that's not exercise. It's what's known as non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So how many of you guys right now, and you can throw this in the chat, have been, tapping your fingers, just kind of tapping your leg the entire time that I've been talking? Anybody out there?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And so that right there is non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So Jake is he's only burning an extra maybe 10 to maybe 30 calories over an entire hour if he's tapping his fingers. But if you do that 10 extra calories for the 16 odd hours in theory that you're conscious, that's 160 calories a day. You then multiply that over a week, and now we're up to a grand total of, what would that be? If 1,120. So in theory, if you kept that tapping in caloric balance and didn't keep it in mind, after effectively less than 1 full month, you'd actually lose a pound of fat just from sitting there air drumming. So when we're looking at the effects of all these things together, we are going to throw exercise on top of all this, because we need to have this energy production in general, and this energy production just to keep the body alive, the heart beating, your diaphragm contracting, your immune system fighting off whatever's coming, your brain blinking. We need to be able to increase that, and that's when we talk about cardiac output and otherwise, for the increased demand to our muscles. Now, all of this energy production in the body is not 100% efficient. We're actually pretty damn inefficient. We're only using about 1/4 of the energy we release through those chemical bonds as actual work. The other 75% is released as heat. Now, this is useful because that 75% released as heat does what with our body temperature, guys?
Increases?
Yes, increases. That's going to allow us to keep our body temperature up. So it's great to have a higher resting metabolic rate, or obviously to move when you're cold, because it's going to increase your body temperature. That's absolutely normal. So if now we'll go back to kind of thinking about the future, aka your final, if you had to pick a body that had to go operate in really warm temperatures, would you want one that's artificially more efficient with using calories to perform work, or one that's less efficient to use calories to perform work?
More efficient.
Yes. Why is that, Gracie?
Because, you just always want the more efficient way to do things, right?
Well, but think about it. If you're on the other side, if you had to have a body operating in really cold environments and you couldn't just wear enough layers to deal with it, you would want one that's really inefficient. So it's wasting a lot of energy for work as heat, because that's going to be warmer. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And that's actually, how many of you guys ever heard of brown fat?
I've heard of it.
Yeah, brown fat, it exists in young kids, and it still exists in humans, to adults to a certain extent, but it's literally fat cells that are inefficient, that they literally waste a lot of energy as heat. They don't capture it as actual ATP to use. Instead, it just heats up this tissue and heats up the surrounding tissues. So arguably, that brown fat, if you could have more of it, it would make you tolerate cold weather even more so, or being in colder environments. And then on top of it, you would actually be burning more calories without really having to do anything, because that energy is not being harnessed for ATP that would actually have to be expelled during work. Science. So when we're talking about energy expenditure, obviously there's a huge amount of ways that we can go ahead and measure that, from doing heart rates to accelerometers and otherwise. But the key is, like anything else, is just remember, guys, it's a math problem. Can we produce as much energy as we need to, given the physiology, the weight, the biomechanics of that body to do the work we want? And if not, what can we then do to go ahead and enhance that energy output. Now, could this be that we do a better job of the cardiovascular system delivering energy so we can produce a greater amount of ATP? Do we just try to make the body lighter? Do we become more efficient at the movements that we're doing? All of those are ways that we could go ahead and literally help enhance our body's ability to perform any given endeavor. So if you guys don't have any more questions, comments, concerns, next time we're going to go ahead and dive a little bit more into the neurological system, and especially, and then probably touch a little bit more on the hormonal system, just because it's super important and useful. So, any other questions, comments, concerns, guys? Well, thank you guys for dealing with the wonderful interruptions of me giving Norbert trouble. Sorry, Norbs, you're actually right to bark today. Not really, though. You don't really need to bark. People are nice. Oh, any of you guys ever seen the movie Silverado?
No.
Great quote by Kevin Kline at the end of it that I'm a big proponent of, which is, you can go through life thinking everybody's your friend or thinking everybody's your enemy. At the end, you're probably right. So, go through, thinking we're friends. You guys have a great day. Be safe out there, guys, and I will talk with you more soon. Okay? If you have anything that you need, shoot me a message. I'm going to keep grading your assignments and then trying to make sure all your grades are updated so you got a good idea of what you need for the final. All right, guys. Bye-bye.